Hi, I'm Sonia Jante.
I'm Jonathan Ward.
And I'm Kimberly Lane, and together we're unlocking leadership. We're three experienced executive coaches with very different disciplines. In every episode, we take a question from a real client and provide key insights to address their challenges from our three different perspectives. It's a comprehensive approach to understanding challenges and opportunities. Let's get to it. Our question today is from Garrett in St. Louis. He says, in my last one-on-one with my boss, he advised me to grow strategic leadership skills if I want to be considered for new roles. How do I do that? Sonia, I think you might be appropriate for this first question. What strategic leadership skills would you recommend to Garrett?
Well, Garrett, thank you so much for asking the question. And I'm going to break down the strategic leadership skills into three buckets so that that gives you sort of a perspective because potentially there's some things that you have in each one of the buckets. So the first one that I think about is you've got to understand the business beyond the scope of the functional role that you're in. So being able to understand sort of not only what the business is about, the ecosystem in which the business operates becomes quite important. So the business acumen and obviously growing any kind of functional or technical skills in that area. The second bucket is about making complex decisions. Because when you're in a strategic leadership level role, you're going to have to be looking at things. You're going to have to learn on the fly. Your IQ matters in terms of being able to analyze and break things down. The quality of your decision is extremely important. So you might want to reflect on past decisions you've made. And ideally, if there were not, you didn't get certain kinds of results, you've been able to improve upon that, hone in on that. And then obviously, what is your problem solving approach, whether it's inclusive with other people or, I look at the right and left brain kind of things so that you're integrating information across the board. And the last bucket is how good at you're creating the new and the different. We're living in very interesting times. And so the very first thing that I think everybody's had to upskill in the last couple of years, but it's extremely important to be a strategic leader, is to have comfort with ambiguity and have an approach for dealing with that comfort. Then the next thing is, how good are you at innovation management? Have you ever had to manage any kind of a project and move it through an innovation stage? And then obviously that brings in strategic agility. So your ability to pick up on information, what journals do you look at? What sites do you go to? What podcasts do you listen to that help you grow your knowledge about strategy in the business world? And then lastly, as we live longer and we have more experience, we have perspective on things. So I would say that those would be where I get started in terms of thinking about being more strategic and having strategic leadership skills. What do you think, Jonathan?
Well, I think it's a fascinating question, and it made me think of a comment. This is probably apocryphal, but there's a story that's made it big in NASA history that in 1962, President Kennedy was visiting a NASA facility for the first time, and during his tour of that facility, he met a janitor who was carrying a mop down the hallway, and the president casually asked the janitor what he did for NASA, and the janitor said, "I'm helping to put a man on the moon." And so this was, take a minute and think about that for a minute. The janitor knew something that most of us struggle with, which was the purpose of his work ultimately. He was keeping the building clean so that the scientists and engineers and astronauts could focus on their mission of putting men on the moon. So they didn't have to worry about whether the facility was clean, and how things looked. So he was working in that for them. So that's, for me, a strategic mindset when you start thinking about what's the ultimate goal of what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. And then I kind of like to think about where you are in your context. You probably got where you are because you're very successful at doing your job. But to develop that strategic mindset, you have to start taking on a broader perspective. What are the kind of things that keeps your boss up at night? What kind of things keep your vice president up at night? What's your company's ultimate goals? Who are your main competitors? What are they doing? Sonia mentioned what's going on in the marketplace for your organization. What technical skills do you need to develop? What are your peers working on? What do they care about? What do your employees want to do? How are you developing the skill sets in your organization, the people who report to you, who are going to advance and carry on more work in the organization? Who's going to replace you as you move up in the organization? Those are all strategic types of thoughts. And so the more you can do to take that kind of mindset and just to ask yourself those questions every day, the better prepared you are to help working in a strategic environment. And I would say from a very practical standpoint, working with a mentor, working with a coach, working on a cross-functional team, if you can get your boss to assign you to a cross-functional project that's going to give you broader exposure in the organization to just outside of your business line, I think that's going to help you get more of a strategic mindset. How about you, Kimberly?
Yeah, great point, Jonathan. Both of you have really addressed that. Really, in order, Garrett, to have strategic leadership, you really need the strategic mindset. Sonia talked about just knowing the business and then always obviously having a vision, then also that ability to look around the corner and see innovation. Jonathan, you really honed in on the fact that as a leader with strategic mindset, that permeates the entire organization down to the janitor who truly knew what his mission was and what his goal was in working there. So I kind of like to think of it as its ability to really take and visualize a big picture scenario and be able to relate it down to the here and now and to communicate that to your people as at the Space Center had done, obviously, to the janitor, that they can implement it and take it forward. So, it's not, if you're very detailed on your work today and very present about where you are today, that's great. But really a strategic leader has to be able to see around the corner, anticipate what's coming around the corner, maybe have to develop new skill sets, as Jonathan mentioned, and then to be able to constantly have a pulse of how that affects the here and the now and anticipate and change for that and lead through it. So it's a very dynamic role to play, Garrett, something that I think you certainly can achieve with, say, a mentor or a coach, as Jonathan had mentioned. But it's just really trying to get yourself into a mindset of being strategic and thinking about, okay, what possibly could happen in the future? How could that affect my here and now? How do I need to communicate that to those around me in order to manage that change or that uncertainty that we might be experiencing? So any other comments you guys want to talk about?
Well, I think that something that I know strategic leaders tend to do is they tend to look at areas that nobody else is looking at and come up with a project that is going to make a difference for either solving something that has not been solved and needs to be solved, or for addressing something that's been on the back burner. But if we did something about that. So potentially you might want to get yourself involved in coming up with a new project or speaking to your leader about the kind of project that you could be involved with that, as Jonathan said, would move you into being in conversations and in rooms with people that think a little differently than you, so that you now understand that you can solve a problem in a different kind of way.
I also think, kind of along those same lines, Sonia, it's just about being curious and not being satisfied with just where we are today, but being curious about what could possibly happen tomorrow and are we prepared? Or is there a way we can do this differently that's more efficient or adds more value to our clients or adds more to the bottom line? Or what are, a year or two from now, what do we see that the workplace or organizations are going to be dealing with? We don't know, but we can certainly be curious and make some guesses, seeing on the trends that have been transpired so far. So it's just really having a curious mindset. And then also, as both of you have really stressed, is just trying to get those skill sets that you are able to manage that yourself, and then also communicate that to those around you so you're an effective leader.
Yeah, I think there's nothing more frustrating than your boss says you need to be more strategic, but then they can't tell you what that looks like. And so a lot of times I think what's important is, to think about somebody who you think of as a strategic leader and look at what they do and what kind of questions do they ask and how do they show up in meetings, and maybe think about how you might ask questions that other people are not asking. That's a good step towards getting you out of the rut that you might find yourself in just trying to meet operational goals every year.
And there's nothing wrong with him asking his boss to define the top 3 leadership strategic skills that he thinks he should hone in on. And if he doesn't have them straight out, then potentially, have a 360 done where he'd be able to have, if you will, information from others about what he might want to be able to work on. There's another coach that Kimberly and I know that shared once a particular analogy that I thought was sort of good. And so I think it's important to share it with Garrett. And that is that if you think of your work world as being a building and you think of the place, that you are in your career as a particular floor. So let's say your building is 100 stories high and the floor that you're on right now is the 50th floor. Then looking at being able to be more strategic in your organization is you're going to want to meet the people that are working on the 70th floor and the 80th floor and potentially arrange some kind of either a mentoring or a ongoing, coffee or conversation. So I think that's sort of like a nice analogy to keep in mind. Anything else that either one of you want to add for Garrett at this time?
The only, kind of along those same lines, Sonia, is that depending on Garrett, I don't know what your role and what department you're in, but maybe if you're more in an operational role, maybe looking and meeting occasionally or frequently, I should say, with others that are more along the front lines of the front seat of innovation, or looking around what's coming up for tomorrow, whether it's a technical innovation team, whether it's marketing as they're anticipating their campaigns. But somewhere in your organization, I'm sure, depending on where you sit, there's some other groups that you can partner with, or at least build some relationships with, that will give you some insight into what's coming around the corner, and you can start adopting that strategic mindset within your group today.
Well, thank you, Garrett from St. Louis, for your question today. We hope you, our viewers and listeners, have a better understanding of strategic leadership skills. To our listeners, if you like the content that we shared today, please like the episode and also share and subscribe to our YouTube channel, unlockingleadership-askthecoaches.com. We look forward to hearing your reviews. You can also find Unlocking Leadership Ask the Coaches on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. If you have a leadership question for any of our coaches, please reach out at info@unlockingleadership-askthecoaches.com. We would love to hear from you. Thanks for joining us today. Tune in next time to find the keys to unlocking your best leadership.